in it for me? What's in it for me? I came here for a good time and another episode of Columbia House Party.
I was hoping you were going to make the what's in it for me is dramatic. I'm glad you did.
Yeah, I thought about going even further over the top.
Yeah.
But
well, another time.
Strange song to have appear on a hit TV show.
A little bit, yeah. Strange band to have appear on a hit TV show.
Yeah. I think you're just lucky that like that song sounds like Hamilton is doing a Dylan impression. And I thought about doing the intro as me doing Hamilton doing Dylan.
I like it.
I workshopped it. It was not going to work.
No?
It's going to be a disaster.
Now you've teased me with what could have been.
Yeah. What's going on, man? How are you?
I'm good. I'm ready to talk about a band I really like.
Ready to walk?
Man.
Oh, boy.
How many times can we make that joke?
That
Probably just the one.
That should be it.
Yeah.
I hope so. We're just like every band saying that we're broken up, but
yeah,
keep on going.
And I'm sure that our post-breakup albums are going to be really good. I hope.
I doubt it.
No? Okay. Well,
no, this episode's not off to to a fiery start here. All right, we're going to talk about the Walkmen. Jake, which album are you firing up for us here?
So I felt there were a few ways we could have gone with the Walkmen. As we said, they never really broke big, so they don't really have that like one album that you would go like, this is a seminal one that insists upon itself that we have to talk about. So I went with the one that they are playing on the OC, which has their biggest hit on it.
Makes sense to me.
And so I was always sort of aware of the Walkmen. A buddy of mine, it was a huge Walkman fan, and throughout university would always try to like, I think he knew that I would really like them, and he was always pushing me. And for some reason I was kind of like indifferent towards them and didn't want to listen to them. And then in 2012, I believe, I was doing my first quote unquote adult rewatch of the OC, even though I was like 23 or 24 at the time. And I'm rewatching the OC, and then all of a sudden I hear this band and I go, oh yeah, the Walkmen are on the OC. And then that night, I remember very clearly, I forget where I was going. I was walking down Bay Street and I threw this album on because I'd just been watching the OC. And I was like, oh, right, now the Walkmen are one of my favorite bands. So I figured we'd talk about that album, which is Bows and Arrows.
What's in it for me? What's in it for me? I came here for a good time, and you're telling me to leave. So you don't have to say it again, 'cause I heard you the first time.
Come on, that's
I think that's just his voice, man.
no, I don't know. That's a little, you know what it honestly sounds like is Charlie Kelly.
Doing Dylan.
Yeah.
It's funny. I never even made that connection until you said it, and now I can't not hear it.
That song, by the way, is What's in it for me. It's the opening
Yes,
track
the
on
first
Bows and
song.
Arrows.
So a lot of information on this album is going to be pulled from Meet Me in the Bathroom.
What a great source material.
Lizzie
for
Goodman's
us.
amazing book about the New York rock scene. If you have not read it and you enjoyed this show, you will absolutely enjoy this book. Go read it. It's amazing. Meet Me in the Bathroom will come up a few times
Yes.
on this show. So I'm bringing that up not just to say that it's awesome, because it is, but most of the quotes from this are from that book, and I don't want to have to keep saying that it's from the book. So there you go. So the Walkmen, all the members of the Walkmen grew up in and around Washington, D.C. They all played in bands together when they were younger, and they all went to the same high school, St. Albans School. They all moved to Harlem at the same time. And the band formed in 2000 out of the ashes of two New York bands. One was the Recoys, which featured Hamilton Lighthouser and Peter Bauer. The other was Jonathan Fire Eater, or Jonathan Asterisk Fire Eater, which included
Fire Asterisk Eater.
Fire Asterisk Eater, yes, sorry. Which included Walter Martin, Paul Maroon, and Matt Barrick. Jonathan Fire Eater, we could probably do
Absolutely
an episode on Jonathan Fire Eater alone. So I'm not going to go too deep into them, but to give you a sense of sort of the stature, I guess, for lack of a better word, of Jonathan Fire Eater. Two quotes here from Meet Me in the Bathroom. One from Anthony Rasamando of Dirty Pretty Things, who said, "There was nothing going on, and then there was Jonathan Fire Eater. That was really the band." Jenny Lescu also said they were a garage rock band in the more modern sense of the big umbrella term of garage rock, the Stooges version of garage rock. I love them. Jonathan Fire Eater were three members of the Walkmen, and Stuart Lupton, who tragically committed suicide in 2018. They were a band that I didn't really get into until I got into the Walkman. Like, I think because of my age and the fact I didn't live in New York, I sort of went backwards.
They were also like pre the boom of that era,
Totally.
right? So it's like the sense that I get is that they were the band that everyone was pointing to and being like, this is the kind of music we're making, and like this should be good and we all love it. And then the next kind of, not wave, but like the next step of the New York scene was what really picked up steam. And it almost, I mean, obviously they were a part of it because the Walkmen are a part of it, but it almost seems like Jonathan Fire Eater was the precursor to it, and they almost missed the wave as it came out.
I think so. And like they opened the book of Meet Me in the Bathroom,
Right.
more or less. So they are sort of the precursor. And they also broke up like right after they sort of were about to, like, right before the New York scene sort of took off.
Wow, so even
done.
before they were the Walkmen, they were getting in their own way.
Yeah, it's truly. If you've never listened to Jonathan Fire Eater, I highly recommend it because they are awesome. And this is one of their songs.
Glad you picked that one.
That guitar tone is very like 1999, 2000 New York, I feel like.
When the Curtain Calls for You. It's a great song.
That opens Jonathan Fire's album. Yeah, I don't want to go, I want to go really deep into Jonathan Fire, but I also have another show to do. So we'll get into them on someday. Dave Sitek of TV on the Radio said, I only knew Jonathan Fire Eater because they turned into the Walkmen. Matt Berninger of The National, of course, said, the Strokes are undeniable, but for me, the Walkmen were the New York band that I held in high regard on multiple levels. Cool factor, songwriting, inventiveness, and originality. So
the originality point is interesting to me because, like, I think maybe because they came from those two bands, they felt like a need to sound different.
I think
and,
so.
And like, you don't want to sound like Jonathan Fire Eater. You don't want to sound like the Recoys.
And yeah, and
I wonder how much that, like, I wonder, because those quotes are right. They do sound a little different, and the Walkmen now sound like a very mid 2000s rock band. But at the time, like going back and listening to stuff of that era, it feels like they were, we said Jonathan Fire Eater was a precursor. Well, the Walkmen almost feel like they were the ones pushing the sound a little bit. And I wonder how much of that is like, oh, well, we have to do something different. We were doing this stuff in other bands and it didn't quite click.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too that quote is from Dave Sitek of TV on the Radio, who are another New York band that I would say pushed a lot of limits and sounded like nothing else in the scene at the time. Also a band we will definitely talk about at some point. But I think the Walkmen are so interesting in that scene as you're talking about. And this album, especially the way that it's sort of structured, and it goes from like it almost goes like alternating rock song, quiet song, rock song, quiet song in a way
they
that
missed the Pixies formula here.
Yeah.
So it's supposed to be on the same
one
song.
But I feel like you listen to a lot of those albums, like the Yeah Yeah Yeahs record, Is This It by The Strokes, even stuff that came a little later, like Vampire Weekend, they don't seem to have sort of that, like the Walkmen seem very intentional in what they're doing. And they're also a band where all their albums are kind of different as well, which is an interesting thing of, like, to your point of trying to differentiate themselves and stick out from the scene.
And I also, when you get into things like, well, they all came from other bands, and as we'll get into, they kind of stepped on their own feet a little bit throughout and then Hamilton goes on and does something with Vampire Weekend later that's its own project, but like kind of sounds like an extension.
Yeah.
It's like it when you look at all of the members of the Walkmen in the macro, it like absolutely makes sense that there would be these like starts and stops and fracturings and stuff like that, and changes in sound, because it seems like they're all super restless.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And they're all writing at seemingly all times, considering the solo output since the band has stopped.
Yeah.
So the Walkmen came out of Jonathan Fire Eater breaking up. Paul Maroon said, "We kept playing and writing music, and we just went back to school. Then at one point, as one way of committing to another, we decided to start a studio." So Walter Martin said, "It wasn't built on Fire Eater money," even though that's what it says on our Wikipedia page, which makes us seem like we're smart or something.
By the way, I love the idea that quote is probably now on their Wikipedia page.
Probably, yeah. I also had that thought. Walter Martin said that he said, "I mostly like the idea of a studio because it was like we're taking on investors and financial commitment, so we are bound to continuing and making it work. I was thrilled because we were doing it again. The only problem was we didn't have a singer. We had a studio and we started trying stuff with different singers, and then came Ham. He's actually my first cousin."
Ham
is what they call him.
Ham.
The studio, they dubbed it Mercata Studios. Mercata kind of became their headquarters, where they wrote, where they recorded, where they practiced, where they hung out, all those things. In 2001, the band released a self-titled EP of songs on Startime International.
We're going to talk about what came of Mercata Studios and how the Walkmen themselves came to be after this.
So the band opens Mercata Studios. In 2001, they would release a self-titled EP on Startime International. The EP featured a blend of upright pianos and other vintage instruments, which is sort of very Walkman-y. They made their official live debut at Joe's Pub in East Village around this time as well. This band started.
Shout out to Joe.
Joe's Pub, I've never been to, but I've heard it's like all over Meet Me in the Bathroom. It's like a venue that, like, I feel like it must be like what the Reverb here used to be or something, but RIP.
Field trip. Let's go. Columbia House Party field trip to Joe's Pub.
Hey, if you're buying.
I'm not buying you a trip to New York. No.
Why?
No. How well do you think this podcast is doing?
Yeah, fair enough. The Walkmen began to pick up steam in New York. It was that, as we said, that time of so many bands popping up. They were among the many, but also...
It's so wild to like read back on and think on that there was like the scene was defined by the lack of scene for a really long time, and then just like a big explosion.
Bang. And
I know that like it was more it was more incremental and linear than that, but really it really does feel like you look at, bands from New York that were popular, and you have this like long gap of like there's not a lot, and then everything in like a 2 to 3 year span is just boom, boom, boom.
And I also think that I think of it sort of how there's so many college athletes, and then like only the best of the best make the pros. I feel like in New York there were so many bands that, like, if it's a band that you've heard of, they must have been really fucking good.
Right. Because you have this exploding scene, and then as each, the high tide rises all boats thing, as each successive band gets more popular, they play a bigger venue, and then a new band is opening for them, and then someone has to backfill the smaller venues.
Yeah.
So you hope that it works on a merit system. It probably didn't in every case, but in some of these cases, definitely.
So the Walkmen, after applying themselves on stage and building up some audience and some interest, in 2002, they released Everyone Who Pretended to Like Me Is Gone. Probably the biggest hit that wasn't a hit off this record was a song called We've Been Had, which sounds like this.
I'm a modern guy, I don't care much for the go-go or the retro image I see so often telling me to keep trying. Maybe you'll get here someday. Keep up the working. Okay, 'cause the book on their brain. myself change as the days change over. I hear the songs and the words don't change. I write them out of the book right there. We've been had. You say it's over. Sometimes I'm just happy I'm older. We've been had. I know it's over. Somehow it got easy to laugh out loud.
Those vintage pianos.
I love the piano in that song. Also, Everyone Who Pretended to Like Me Is Gone is an awesome album title.
Good.
Let's go back to a much earlier mailbag when we were asked what our band album and lead single titles would be.
All that.
That's Everyone Who Pretended to Like Me Is Gone is A+ based on the ones that got discussed in the Discord channel.
So everyone who pretended like me was gone was also released by Startime. It was extremely well received. It was named the 27th best album of 2002 by Pitchfork. Two of the songs on the record, The Blizzard of 96 and That's the Punchline, are reworked from Hamilton and Peter Bauer's days in the Recoys. We've Been Had, which we just listened to, was featured in a Saturn Ion commercial. If there's one thing the Walkmen were never afraid of doing, it was getting that
Making money. Yes.
which
we're going to talk
respect.
about with respect to the OC. 'cause
Absolutely.
Hamilton has some quotes. We're just like, why not, man?
Yeah.
Cut the check.
The album was compared to U2, The Cure, and The Strokes. I feel like you couldn't have been a New York band full of men that wasn't compared to The Strokes at this time.
Also, like, let's relax, Pitchfork.
Yeah.
U2 and The Cure.
I don't really hear it either.
Me neither. I went back and read the review and like I get what they were trying to do, but it's like not to take it back to Raptor stuff, but like if I'm trying to hype up a player and things that they're doing well and why I'm excited about them, I'm not comparing them to like, whoa, he's got an aggression like Michael Jordan and a handle like Dame Lillard. I'm like, no, here's a much more reasonable comparison that won't make people throw their hands up and be like, all right, you're up your own ass, get out of here.
And also like a comparison that also doesn't even like that Pittsburgh review is extremely complimentary because they really love the album, which is fair, but because it's a great album, but it's just like, it just seems like these are big bands. Let's talk about them in this context with this band that sounds nothing like either of these bands.
Yeah, and just don't set the bar that high. If you're, especially like a band like the Walkmen at this time is not going to be familiar to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And if you're writing a positive review of an album, I feel like part of your intention is to get people to check it out because you like it and you're excited about it and you think people like it. Well, setting the bar, first of all, setting the expectations that high, but then also using two of the biggest bands in the world, like you're just not setting people up to be introduced to that album well.
Yeah, I agree.
No offense to whoever wrote that review.
No, but I
it's
think
like-
it's a fair point.
Not every band is U2 or The Cure.
That being said, the expectations were set incredibly high for the Walkmen.
Apparently.
And then
U2 and The Cure.
they had to come and try to clear it with this record that we're talking about today. They left Startime International, ended up signing with a subsidiary of Warner Brothers. Peter Bauer said, "We talked to everyone in the music business that we had ever met, and everyone the Fire Eater guys knew, but no one wanted to put out our record. So we put it out ourselves and sold it online for a little while. But then we got a record deal with Warner Brothers, but after we signed, they said, no, you're going to this other label. So we were on a subsidiary of Warner Brothers, which for a band trying to make it big, got to be a bit of a blow. Kind of the story of the Walkmen, I think, a little bit.
Although in this case, it's not them doing the
That's true.
holding themselves up.
That's true.
This one was just a bad break.
So the Walkmen went about recording their follow-up to Everyone Who Pretended Like Me Is Gone to meet those expectations that were put on them. 2003, they began recording at their studios, Mercata. They also recorded at Sweet Tea Studios in Oxford, Massachusetts, Easley McCain Studios in Memphis, Tennessee, and the Magic Shop in New York City. It seems like this album is a bit of a patchwork in a way, like a lot of songs.
Like a couple of the songs you can tell were from these sessions. And
Yeah.
these sessions. As I've learned more about how songs get produced and made, in part from living with a musician and like researching for these episodes and stuff, it's cool to me that bands will record parts of albums at different places. I feel like me mentally and the type of person I am, I would want to do an entire album in one studio and in one space.
Yeah, same.
With one consistent process. But that is maybe not how you get the best album. It might be how you get the most cohesive album thematically.
Yeah, which I would
and
not.
sound-wise.
I would not say Bows and Arrows is a particularly cohesive.
No,
album.
it's definitely not. And they recorded across 4 studios, and I'd imagine with a couple different producers and mixers. So you get. It's also a very long album, so it would be. It would.
It's funny you bring up the producer because I actually started without one, and then the label was like, "You need to get one.
You need a producer and an editor, guys."
So the lead single for the album was a song called "The Rat," which is their biggest hit, and in my opinion, it is one of the best, if not the best, song to come out of the New York indie rock boom of the early 2000s. I love this song, and I hope you do too. And it sounds like this.
So my first association with that song is that it's on the MLB 2K7
It
soundtrack,
is.
which came out like years after the song
And
came
it's
out.
on like 3 video game soundtracks as well.
It's a very video game song. It also, to me, like if someone had never listened to this like, say, I don't know, 2000 to 2008 New York rock scene or whatever, and they wanted like the song that captures it, that would be the one.
I think so too. I remember when I first sort of got into the Walkman after my buddy had been sort of telling me about them for so long. I heard that song and I was like, why haven't I not been listening to this band? This rules. Like, I think it's such a good song. I'm not the only one who thinks that. Sarush Alvi, the co-founder of Vice, says in Meet Me in the Bathroom, the Walkman's The Rat should have been a fucking monster. That's the biggest miss of the decade. It did like semi-well, not well enough, obviously, to break them. It reached 45 on the UK singles chart and 49 on the Scottish singles chart.
All right.
The song came out of a jam session at Mercata. Matt Barrick, the drummer of the Walkmen, instigated the track by playing that fast drum pattern, which then quickly built into the song. Hamilton Lighthouser said, we threw some chords on it and I wrote the words in 5 minutes, which...
Perfect. We've run into this a couple times. Is like sometimes, especially like mid-recording an album or mid-writing an album, sometimes just like riffing is a good way probably to break up the creative process.
I think so. And it's also the song that caused them to get an editor and a producer, sorry. They were self-producing their material at this point, just so they'd done on their debut. However, they were trying to track the electric organ and guitar for this song and couldn't quite get it right. So the label said, please get a producer, which they did, named Dave Sardi, who ended up coming in and producing the whole record. Also at this time, they hired an intern who is someone you may have heard of, because Ezra Cohen of Vampire Weekend was the band's intern at the time and said that this song was originally called Girls at Night, which I don't know why it was called Girls at Night.
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, The Rat is not a super accessible song name either.
No,
but
Ezra Koenig was like part of the band, sort of their unofficial extra member who did not actually play on any of their songs, but was around in the studio. They said, we decided our studio, we needed an intern. So we put some flyers out that someone spread word and we interviewed a few people. The moment Ezra walked in the door, we were like, this guy's the coolest dude ever, which I don't know a lot about Vampire Weekend, but it seems like he has that vibe.
Yeah, he's probably wearing 3 colored shirts at once with all 3 of them popped up.
So the Josh Charles in American Summer?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. Peter Bauer said about The Rat, when we wrote that song, we were like, this has got to be worth something. It just has to be. If anything's worth something, it's got to be that. which I think is a fair. I think if you finish writing a song like that, you have to be like, we have something on our hands, and unfortunately, it never really took off for them.
And which is crazy because like you look and Pitchfork had it as like the number 6 single
Yeah,
of
that year.
2004 and number 20 of the 2000s when they did their 2010. It's like everyone loved this song. It just like maybe the like radio just wasn't ready for like
Maybe
not
it's a
ready. Ready's not the word because like it's not a complicated song.
No,
or,
but
like,
it is a little angrier than the average New York stuff coming out of that time.
Yeah.
Like, it's not Maps. It's not Last Night. Like,
yeah, it's not Jet putting like a wholly accessible spin
Yeah.
on the sound.
Like, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with any of those songs. Like, as we've discussed Maps and how good it is, and like obviously
almost literally the best.
yeah, and like obviously Last Night is a classic as well. But there is a little bit more of an. It feels weird to say it's more of an edge than Karen O, which there isn't, but it's more than their radio songs, I guess.
Right.
Like, I can see why this one didn't quite hit big like the other ones did.
Although at the same time, like this was happening around like the end of the new metal wave.
That's
and, like,
true.
It could have like obviously this doesn't sound anything like new metal, but a harder like standard rock song. Like I don't know. I thought you would think it would have some crossover potential to just like reach a couple different audiences, and instead it only reached that like kind of niche audience.
Yeah,
the Pitchfork audience basically.
Rolling Stone actually called this song one of the greatest songs of the century. I assume talking about the last 20 years, not the last 100, but still, like that's.
I mean, I don't know my 1930s music super well.
A lot of just like sousaphone. So the band started their promo tour for Bows and Arrows, as we discussed. They ended up on the OC, where they played 2 songs at the Bait Shop, What's in It for Me, which we heard earlier, and this song.
Somebody's waiting for me at home. Somebody's waiting for me at home. I should have known. I should have known. And somebody's got a car outside. Somebody's got a car outside. Let's take a ride. Let's take a ride. Somebody's waiting for me at home. Somebody's waiting for me at home. I should have known. I should have known. There we go.
I'd do a couple janitor shifts for free tickets to that.
Right. And I feel like I have always thought that that's, even though like The Rat is maybe their signature song, that song was like, what does the Walkmen sound like?
Right.
I
And
would
that
say
song, by the way, is Little House of Savages.
But I think just the way it incorporates like Hamilton's vocals, Barrick's very driving drums at all times, the combination of organ and electric guitar, like it just seems.
Not to jump ahead to the ranking, but like I feel like this album has a very clear number 1 and number 2 song.
I think so, yeah. And in a way, I'm surprised The Rat wasn't one of the songs they played on the OC, but it also, I don't know where it would fit in the episode.
Yeah, that song fits what they're doing at the Bait Shop. And
Yeah.
I mean, we again, not to use the word accessibility too much, just like a little bit more
I think so.
open
yeah.
to an OC-ish audience.
Yes, I think so. It definitely sounds more akin to like the other bands that we'll talk about this month.
That's a great way to put it. It sounds like, pre-Killers
Yeah, totally.
kind of stuff. And then also like if you're thinking about the kind of music that the kids on the OC would be clamoring to see, it's definitely on the softer side of what the Walkmen did, not the
Rat
more
side.
aggressive side. Yeah.
It was also a very well-received song in the review of the album on Pitchfork, which was a 9.2 Best New Music review. So extremely
Wow.
complimentary.
Which means they must hate it now.
Yeah, exactly. It said, The Rat could be the Walkmen's finest moment if they didn't immediately surpass it with Little House of Savages, which clearly demonstrates how immeasurably these guys have tightened as a band. Paul Maroon leads with a cyclical riff as the band unloads their full inventory of aggressive histrionics into the resulting hypnotically tangled mess like a rock and roll fire sale. God, I hate reading these. If I'll even concede that Lighthouse's voice now actually merits, albeit rarely, an occasional allusion to Bono if crossed with a gravel pit. When the Walkmen are in full on assault mode, the vocal comparison doesn't seem quite so silly. Which, like, I don't hear Bono in his voice at all, but I guess it is like an epic sort of sounding singing voice. But
It's distinct.
yeah,
I don't really see the Bono comp either. But again, back to my earlier point, when you're making player comps or musician comps or band comps, don't go all the way to
Bono.
Fucking Bono. Like,
2 albums in a row.
there are other bands.
Yeah. So the band seemed to very consciously, as we were sort of alluding to, try to differentiate themselves from the rest of the scene with these sort of interspersed, dissonant, slower tunes, and then following up with like a heavy hitter like The Rat or Little House of Savages. Paul Maroon said, "It's hard to say what this music was, but the external drive was to get away from being rock and roll, rock and roll. We just wanted everything to be weird." Which is sort of, I think, in a way, emblematic of the band's sort of self-sabotaging ways. Not that it doesn't work, because it's their sound.
Yeah, and do what you want creatively.
Yeah.
But to like have the almost active idea of like not doing what people expect you to do is like, you should do what you want to do and what you want to do creatively. You should maybe not be doing things just to like be like, well, they don't,
exactly. Let's
they don't know what's coming next.
Be weird.
Yeah.
Josh,
it's like, hey, everyone really liked this. What if we do something else?
Yeah.
It's like, well, that only makes sense if you want to do something else. If you want to keep making the same stuff, there's some money in it.
Yeah, and I feel like it also made them sort of like they were your favorite band's favorite band, if
Yes.
that makes sense. And I
that's
think
a good way to put it.
I think they very much appealed to a certain critic stream more so than
they're a pitchfork band.
Yeah, for sure they're a pitchfork band.
Which is fine. That's not a criticism.
No,
That's a
but you know,
there's a reason pitchfork is pitchfork, and
everyone
there's a
knows
reason
everyone knows what you mean when you call them a pitchfork
Exactly.
band. Josh Medell of the AV Club, in his review of it, said, "Next to the Strokes' stock still stance, Interpol's gloomy distance, and the Rapture's art rock scream, the Walkmen's second album, Bows and Arrows, positively exudes warmth and passion. With each successive recording, the Walkmen's history as 3/5 of the hype casualty Jonathan Fireeater — hype casualty is a great
Yes.
term, by the way — becomes far less important than its future, not as a potential next big thing or part of a geographical scene, but as a vital and vibrant force of its own." Which I do think is an interesting way to put it, and juxtaposing them exactly with those other New York bands and what they did. But like warmth and passion is not what I would necessarily associate with the Walkmen, I don't think. Passion maybe.
Relatively.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Walter Martin said, "We came out of the gate pretty well because people liked our first record, we got on TV, and then we had The Rat, so people thought we were cool. The attention thing was ramping up, but it was much slower. For some reason, it just didn't have the intensity the way that the Fire Eater thing happened at all." And Pete Bauer said that, "We always say we are from Washington, D.C., not New York. We just didn't want to be smaller than the next guy. You didn't want to be somebody else's bag carrier, and on stage we were very defiant. We never spoke. We were very aggressive and nasty, and, you know, it was fun. And it was so loud. That was definitely the gag. I remember being able to just take people's heads off. And we'd do these pop shows where we were opening for these horrible bands. We always fought being associated with that downtown New York band world to the point of detriment, which was dumb. It was really stupid." So, like, the intentional, like, there's this huge music boom, we don't want any part of it. Just seems, I don't know if you've read it, but another music book that I highly recommend everyone read is Bob Mayer's Replacements biography, Trouble Boys. It's one of the best music books I've ever read, but there's a lot in that book about how the Replacements always fucked themselves over. Like every opportunity of success, they just blew it. They went on SNL and were wasted, and and between songs, everyone swapped clothes for no reason. Like just like,
none of us should have sex. Wow, none of us should have success in our early 20s.
Yeah. And like
the sex stumble, that wasn't intentional. Not having sex in my 20s. I mean,
but I feel like there's a lot of that in the Walkmen. Maybe not quite as destructive as the Replacements, because no band was quite as self-destructive as the Replacements were. But I do think that there is a bit of that fear of success and fear of accepting your popularity, and especially in that New York scene, I do get that imposter syndrome, or like not wanting to be someone else's bag carrier. Especially that time when it was like, how great are the Strokes? You're like, we're also a band.
Yeah.
But I do think they could have.
Oh, you guys are a New York band? Do you sound like the Strokes?
Yeah, exactly. But I just feel like they could have been so big because they sound so cool. If you know what I mean?
Yeah. And they're absolutely, especially at that time, a band that's that cool and has singles that good, like they could have coasted off of singles. Like
Totally.
even if their next stuff they just made a couple songs that sounded like the Rat or Little House of Savages, like obviously that's again creatively you do what you want.
Yeah.
But it does sound like there was a little bit of this wasn't a creative decision so much as it was like we're counter like this countercultural movement that's taking place. Well, we want to be counter to that.
Yeah, for sure. But I also think it's really interesting because like I only saw the Walkmen once near the end of their time as a band, and I think it's interesting this Pete Bauer quote about how loud they were because that's not what I associate them with at all, especially where their music would go. But I do think that you can hear it a little bit on Bows and Arrows, especially like a song like The Rat is obviously just like
that song must be so good live.
It is. It's extremely good live. The other song that I think really illustrates this sort of time of their careers of just trying to be loud and weird is Thinking of a Dream I Had. Like, let's make some noise.
Got to be the set opener, right?
I would hope so, or closer, one or the other.
Nah, it's open. If the Rat's closing, come on.
Yeah, that's fair. Anyway, Bows and Arrows was extremely well received, as their first album was as well. As I said, a 9.2 and a Best New Music from Pitchfork. As you said, The Rat was named the 6th best song of the year. It got 4 stars from Q, 4 out of 5 from Uncut, an A from Entertainment Weekly, 8 out of 10 from NME. Rolling Stone gave it a 2 out of 5, which...
All right.
The album didn't break the band, as we've said, unfortunately, despite all of their video game presence and their presence on the OC at the Bait Shop. The band was still extremely prolific for the next 6 years. 2006, they released 100 Miles Off, which is my favorite Walkmen record. They also that year released a track-by-track cover album of Harry Nilsson and John Lennon's 1974 album Pussycats, which they called Pussycats Starring the Walkmen, which I still don't know why they put it out. It's really good. But
But for what reason?
I don't know.
Wherefore?
I truly don't know. They released You and Me in 2008. This album was actually kind of interesting because it was released for $5 on Amy Street, which was a pre-release indie music website, and all the proceeds from that went to the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center.
I'm just going to mention this here because I don't think we'll get into it after. My favorite Walkman album.
It's very good. In the New Year is an amazing song. They recorded 13 songs in 5 days in August 2009, seemingly just because they could. They eventually recorded 28 songs, which they then cut to 11 to make the album Lisbon, which was released in September 2010, which is one of my favorite albums of the decade, even if it's not my favorite Walkman record. It received an 8.6 from Pitchfork and is another one of their... They seem to have just like consistent, well-received records. They really have a lot of duds. They released Heaven in 2012, which Stereo Gum named the second best album of that year. The title track was featured extremely heavily in the How I Met Your Mother series finale. 2014, the band went on hiatus and have been on one ever since, seemingly just because they all wanted to focus on their lives and their extremely prolific solo projects. To talk about a couple of them very briefly, Walter Martin has released 5 albums since 2014. including The World at Night, which is an album that is dedicated to Stuart Lupton, the singer of Jonathan Fire Eater, who committed suicide. Peter Bauer has released 2 albums with his band The Devourers, Liberation in 2014 and Mount Calf in 2017. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. It's QAF. Matt Barrick has been the touring drummer of Fleet Foxes since 2017. I saw them that summer, 2017, at Massey Hall, and he was drumming, and he was extremely good because he's an extremely good drummer. And of course, Hamilton Lighthouser has gone on to, I would say, quite a bit of success as a solo artist.
Yeah, I mean, almost as much as the Walkmen.
I would
at their
say
peak.
so,
Yeah,
yeah.
like especially in the last few years, that
Still
his
selling stuff to car commercials.
Yeah, his stuff with Rotsam has been like really well received too.
Yeah.
We talk about the Walkmen as a band that critics have loved consistently, even as they've fallen kind of out of the public consciousness. The Hamilton and Rotsam stuff has been really well received.
Yeah, he has released 3 albums since 2014. His solo debut, Black Hours, in 2014. He released Dear God with Paul Maroon in 2015. And then, as you were just saying, collaboration with Rotsam from Vampire Weekend called I Had a Dream That You Were Mine in 2016.
I like that album.
Me too. And I really like this song.
Sing to me softly, your words had lost me, but your voice sounds nice. Sing to me slowly, blow me some smoke, I don't mind it in my eyes. Oh, I've been running, I ran out of room, so I took my pocket change and bought a chain for you. I used the same voice I always had. I used the same voice I always had. I used the same voice I always
That song is called Sick as a Dog. It was on my best of 2016 playlist that I made for myself, which I like to do. It's one of my favorite songs of that year.
I like the solo approach of, yeah, I'm releasing some stuff under my own name, and then now it's a collaboration, and I'll just throw plus Rotsam at the end.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
like, look, I've complained before about solo projects or side projects that are effectively the same band and don't use the same name. I'm for this.
Yeah, I'm with it. And I think it's also, I could have my timeline wrong because I'm not the biggest, as I said, Vampire Weekend fan, but I believe that collaboration with Rotsam came out like right after Rotsam left
I think you're
Vampire Weekend. So it was sort of like his first project again post Vampire Weekend. Anyway,
for them.
but yeah.
All right, we're going to talk a little bit more about the Walkmen's connection to the OC, how the OC used music, and what it did for the Walkmen and other bands around them after this. All right, so we kind of burned this one earlier in terms of ranking our favorite songs on the album. I think it's a pretty clear 1-2.
Yeah, I think so.
And then we both have favorite Walkman albums that are not Bows and Arrows.
Yes.
But Bows and Arrows, it's right there. I would say it's probably my second one after You and Me.
Yeah, I actually don't know where I'd put it. I think 100 Miles Off is my favorite. I think I'd probably put You and Me second.
Okay.
And then it'd be close between Bows and Arrows and Lisbon for. But again, they're so consistent that they're all really strong.
And in full disclosure, this is not a band that I have spent a ton of time with.
Fair
I've
enough.
probably listened to all those albums 3-4 times, maybe usually around the time they came out. And
then put anything else in 2012. So like it's
yeah, it's not these are not strong takes. And if you disagree with You and Me being number one, then that's fine. I don't
fair
care.
enough.
Yeah.
You and Me's a great record though.
Yeah, I like it. I had a question that is outside of our normal ranking before we get into the OC talk.
Okay.
And the question for you is like, where do we contextualize The Rat as a single? Because it sounds in retrospect like heavier, but like fairly standard stuff that you would have heard on Edge 102 5 years after that.
Sure.
But it's like this really, really good track, and it kind of set the format for what, like, bands that followed toned it down a little bit, took it down to like 7 or 8, but that kind of set the format for what like a popular rock song sounded like for the next few years.
Yeah.
You feel that's fair?
I think so. I think it's a little more, and I think it's mostly in the drumming and in Hamilton's vocals. That's a little more aggressive than those songs. But I do think that it's not far off from like, sort of what you can hear Gang of Youths doing now.
Yeah.
Like obviously they're different sounds, but the like mix of the organ and the guitars, like I can hear a lot of the Rat in What Do I Do If the Fire Goes Out by Gang of Youths. Like I think there's a real, not parallel, but I do think you're right that it is a song that was, I don't know if ahead of its time is the right way to put it, because it's so very much a 2004 New York song.
Yeah, it was maybe like a year ahead of its time. It's
but it does. I think there are more. I don't know if they're a band that is literally influential, because I don't hear them talked about a lot. But I do think that sound is influential without it, maybe indirectly.
Yeah, and I think those two songs are like a pretty good capture of that. I mean, we talked about what that scene kind of was and what that sound kind of was, and everyone took it their own direction. And some bands, the bands that reached the highest heights, made it a little more radio friendly. And
actually, now that I'm thinking about it, now you've asked me, a band I hear a lot of that in their earlier stuff is The National.
Okay,
and like Matt Berninger has said, he thought the Walkmen were the coolest.
Yeah,
and they also a band that wears suits on stage and like has modeled, I think, a lot of, if not directly, like a lot of look that like that cool factor. But like you go back to like some of their older tracks, like Available or Mr. November, and like I think there's a lot of that sort of Walkman sound in it.
My favorite Walkman song is actually not by the Walkmen; it's by the Watchmen. I felt like I should share this because the first time I heard the Walkmen, I felt like an idiot. The Watchmen are a Canadian band from like the mid-late 90s.
Yeah.
When I first heard the Walkmen, I thought it was the Watchmen. The names are just similar enough. The Watchmen don't really sound like the Walkmen. They did have a hit in 1998 called Stereo that I found out is one of the top 25 songs played by a Canadian artist on Canadian radio from 1995 to 2016. Nielsen did a Canada 150 study, and it came in at number 25. I had no idea.
Such a good song, though.
Yes. Ironically here, Canadian Girl off of You and Me is one of my favorite Walkman songs. So there is a little Canada tie-in, but I sure felt dumb the first time I was like, oh yeah, that's not remotely
it's the stereo band.
It's not remotely the same band. Going through the Nielsen Canada 150 study of the top songs played on Canadian radio by Canadian bands over like a 20-year span. Any guess at what number 1 was? Songs by Canadian bands on Canadian radio, 95 to 2016. I can't imagine you'll get this.
Atlantis?
No.
Bryan Adams?
No. I think you're thinking a little too early with that. It's That Song by Big Wreck.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense. That song was everywhere.
Yeah. What a Canadian radio is so weird.
Canadian radio
that is going to be episodes of their own, I think, at some point.
I would love to do just like a Canadian radio episode too, because it's insane.
Anyway, the Walkmen are not the Watchmen. I felt like that was an embarrassing enough thing that I thought at one point that I should share it in the spirit of the podcast and laughing at ourselves.
I like it.
I don't have a huge connection to the Walkmen. I like them. Like I said, I listen to their albums and I like them fine. I don't have strong opinions. I do have strong opinions, though, on how they were used in the OC and how the OC used music in general. This probably dates back. I mean, obviously, music has been used in film and TV forever, but the popularization of indie music as character building and scene setting was like, it kind of shifted around this time. Garden State kind of is the typical movie that did this.
Yeah.
I think it kind of goes back as far as Dawson's Creek too.
Yeah.
Where like they did a little bit of it. But Josh Schwartz.
The direct like talking about it though, I feel like was.
Yes. Josh Schwartz, he literally said that he wanted music to be a character. Jake, what can you tell me about like how the OC went about this?
I mean, I feel like they're the first show, at least that I can remember watching, where people talked about music like people actually talk about music. Like, I feel like Seth being so like direct about referencing, because music, I feel like, at least in my perspective, was obviously always in the background. Everything's scored. Musicals exist. Like music's a huge part of film, unquestionably. But like the OC was the first like mainstream thing. I can remember the characters talking about the music that was going on in the scene. Like that, as we talked about last week, when they're in the car going to TJ and they're literally talking about Death Cab for Cutie.
Or an entire episode is built around trying to get into the Walkman show.
Yeah, I don't remember it being anything, at least for our generation, being so direct about it.
Which is strange because like music is obviously such a big part of people's lives. And like,
Yeah.
and there are obviously instances like that 70s show, like they throw it back, but that's also like a time capsule piece.
And it's like
not the same
and it's done
thing.
in like a winking way of like, hey,
Yeah.
remember this band? Like,
No,
was
this is done in an
current of
earnest way of just like, this is how teens operate and this is
Yeah.
what they're talking about.
And I think like you can look at things like, obviously it's not the first, like, but I feel like everything that talked about music this way in a film or TV setting was done about the music. Like you can listen, like you can watch High Fidelity, which is obviously people talking about music the way people talk about music, but that's the whole point of the thing.
Yeah.
The OC
It's also like what music they're talking about has very little impact. It's talking about like the type of person who cares really deeply
Right.
about music. They don't.
But music
Like, for
is
a
the focus, is
Right.
my point. Whereas in the OC, it's just like they're just tossed aside because that's how people talk about music.
Right.
People go, "Hey, I like this thing," and then they go, "Cool," and then they have a conversation about something else.
Yeah.
And I think the OC was so good at capturing that idea of a person like Seth who talks about music all the time, but it not being the focus.
Right. Yeah. You're not, that isn't the music guy. It's
Yeah.
just a guy who the music is a part of his personality.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it did that-
Sometimes to an irritating extent.
For
which
sure.
We cannot relate to.
No, never. That's not the basis of this show at all. But I just can't think of another show at that time that was so realistic, for lack of a better term, about it.
Yeah, it's great. And I mentioned that Josh Schwartz had said he wanted it to be a character on the show. It was also his feeling he wanted to introduce young people to music they wouldn't otherwise hear, which is a nice sentiment. And I think helped the bands buy into this. It probably didn't hurt that the indie bands were a little cheaper too. And then Alexander Patsovas, who was the music supervisor, has gone on to do Grey's Twilight, which the second Twilight movie has a killer soundtrack, as we were talking with Laura Mitchell off mic, Gossip Girl as well. So like you should get the impression right away from the OC that when Phantom Planet does they pull a Phantom Planet song as the opener. It also spawned 6 soundtracks as indie compilations that they referred to as mixes, and 3 of them charted in the Billboard 200, not Billboard soundtracks, just charted on the Billboard charts.
I remember on the DVDs of one of the first 2 seasons, I forget which one, they had a feature where you could like turn on and it would be like every time a song was played in the background, a little text box would pop up and say what the song was.
Oh, that's very like Prime Video when you can see who's in the scene and everything.
But I think that shows like how integrated music was to the success of the OC when like literally a special feature on the DVD was what song is this?
Yeah, it's interesting to go back and read the band's perspective on these kind of things too, especially with the Walkman. So Hamilton referred to it, he told Pop Matters, it was a solid, if ephemeral, means of promotion. Basically, he thought that it would help them sell records but not gain fans. So people would check them out, but you maybe wouldn't become a Walkman fan because of it, which is like a very pre-streaming age mentality. And this show kind of takes place right as we're entering a streaming or digital age.
It is kind of, you're right, it is kind of the last pop culture piece about buying records.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah. He also said it was pretty weird to play the bait shop. He said, quote, "There were maybe 200 extras on the set pretending to just love us. And I had to sing along with the music. And of course, everyone else is fake playing. They're not even plugged in. So it was really an awkward scene for me. But I think you're just supposed to stand there and look cool. So I just tried to do that."
I mean, he does look really cool, but.
So Sean Rogers of Sub Pop said, "I think it's great that indie bands are on the show. It pays well in comparison to what most indie bands make touring or selling records. And the creator of the show loves that style of music. So it's kind of this win-win where the bands are getting more exposure. It's a little more money than you make. The OC gets to have this cool element, sell soundtracks, which...
And I also think that's an interesting point about Josh Schwartz genuinely loving it, which I think adds an air of authenticity to it. Because it's not just like, hey, let's get these bands that like teens like, like it's him being like, no, these are bands. I think you can look similarly to, Garden State and like Zach Braff was like, I just like these bands and I'm just going to put these bands.
I'm writing a movie. I'm directing a movie. I'm going to put the music that I like.
Exactly.
That's exactly what I would do.
Even though like Garden State is sort of like cheesy now, it makes you buy it. Like it's not just
well, that's a real type of person.
that's it. Like it's not just people being like, we're putting the Walkman in our show and our characters are gonna talk. It's like Josh George was like, I love the Walkman, I'm gonna put them in my show. And then Seth was just like, I just love the Walkman. So it doesn't seem like a cash grab in a way, even though like obviously for everybody involved it is, because that's what
Pop culture
is.
Yeah.
But it's just, it makes it feel more believable to me.
And I think that the success with the way the OC did it kind of set the template. Sinead Stubbins of Pitchfork wrote in 2015 in a piece called Death Cab for Cutie, Seth Cohen and the Indie Influence on the Teen TV Soundtrack. More than any musical tie-in that had come before it, music from the OC remains the most influential teen TV soundtrack critically and commercially. Part of this is due to the cultural climate in 2004. Teenagers' experience of the internet was edging towards the autonomy we have today, but they didn't quite have the same ease and fluidity of social media to share and discover new music. There's a reason the OC called their musical releases mixes instead of soundtracks. So through that lens, you almost get this Josh Schwartz and Alex Patsavas kind of giving the viewer these mixtapes of like, hey, you like our show, you like where we're coming at you from a storyline perspective and a character perspective. Here's also some music that you might like.
Yeah.
It's like, obviously it's a lot more capitalist than that, but I like the sentiment.
Me too. And I think the pre-social media point's a really good one too. Cause like
how do you find new music?
Exactly.
We've talked about this on mailbag episodes.
Yeah,
it's like
exactly.
You kind of stumble across the music you listen to up until maybe 2007, 2008. Just like organically, and if that's through a TV show, then it's through a TV show.
And like I know for a fact, a lot of bands that I still really like today, I discovered through like the OC or like Scrubs or something.
Scrubs is another good music show.
But it also, again, it was just Zach Braff being like, I dig this music, put it in the show. And they're like, okay. But like there's bands that I listen to frequently that I discovered through both of these shows. And so I think it was a totally valid way to discover new music, but before like streaming and social media and everything.
And then it was so successful and the show got so big that you ended up with bigger acts like Gwen Stefani, Beck, and the Beastie Boys all debuting new music on the OC.
Right.
And then it's like, okay, well, you've lost this is a mixtape to our fans thing, but you're making a lot more money and giving your show a little more cachet when
I forgot the
Beck
Beastie,
and the
I
Beastie
forgot
Boys
the Beastie Boys debuted a track on there.
All right, back to the Walkman.
Yes.
Pick a song for the mixtape. I think we've got it down to 2. I think the Rat is probably the most fitting,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't argue if you wanted to go a little House of Savages.
I think I would probably go the Rat just because I think it's the best.
Yes. It's also, we veer into the insist upon itself territory.
Yes.
It is one of the biggest and best songs to come out of that moment and that scene. Thanks so much, guys.
Hey, please try the fish.